Why didn't Lincoln abolish slavery immediately? And did most Southerners actually support the war? These questions show how divided America truly was, even within the North and South themselves. Hi, I'm your host, Elliot McClish, and these are two questions about the American Civil War that we all ask from time to time, and something that we need answers to, as both are key questions to answer from the time period of the war itself and how it unfolded. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in the election of 1860, he was a Republican, though seen as a primarily Northern-friendly candidate that was mostly against slavery, but did not promise at any point during his campaign to fully eliminate it, with only a goal of blocking it from arising in the newly acquired territories, but allowing it to persist in the current areas that they were already in. Lincoln stated himself that he had, quote, no purpose to interfere with the institution of slavery where it exists, end quote. Those upset included most Southern states that relied on the institution of slavery for significant economic purposes, as life there in the South was heavily agricultural based, and work on the plantations was very necessary for their survival and success. However, Lincoln never started the conflict himself, stating that, quote, you can have no conflict without yourself being the aggressors, end quote. When South Carolina, along with 10 other states, seceded from prior to and in the beginning of Lincoln's first term, many thinkers and activists, including former slave Frederick Douglass and activist William Lloyd Garrison, immediately advocated for abolishment, that the war had arisen with the winning goal being anti-slavery. They accused Lincoln of not taking action quicker, and many Republican politicians and congressmen pushed for immediate abolition and a range of increased civil rights for African Americans. However, this belief wasn't the case for a large Northern peace, as most Union supporters and soldiers supported the war for an idea of preserving the country itself, not with the slavery abolishment as the end goal. A number of slave-legal states, including Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, chose not to join the Confederacy, and instead remained with the fractured Union. Lincoln abolishing slavery immediately created a chance to isolate these states and potentially lose them too, a serious problem as the border states gave the Union a massive advantage in terms of resources, land, and border protection, something that the Confederacy did not have. Throughout the war, however, public opinion increasingly shifted to anti-slavery, as it was the fuel to the Confederate fire, and adding slaves to the Union cause offered a more necessary advantage for the Union, leading to Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the passing and drafting of the 13th Amendment, which banned involuntary servitude in 1865 for the end of the war. Which leads us into our second question. Did most people in the South actually support the war? This is another deep question to ask, and the answer is not unanimously. In fact, many were not in favor of the war, including farmers in the lower class, especially Appalachian farmers and communities, leading to an entire anti-Confederate state, that state being West Virginia in 1863, splitting off from Virginia during the war to join the Union. This lack of support stemmed from lower-class farmers' lack of finances and not being able to afford slaves in the first place. They were now plagued with food shortages, inflation, and devastation from Union troops, as the secession from the Union and the Confederacy themselves gave them legitimately no advantages during this time, along with the Confederacy also passing draft exemptions to slave owners, specifically slave owners with 20-plus slaves, which severely isolated the lower-class community. A large number of the Southern population also consisted of the slaves themselves, roughly around one-third. Obviously, they clearly did not support the Confederacy and rarely made significant contributions to the Confederate movement, as they were not even allowed to fight on the front lines. During the end of the war, many more Southern communities were tired of the conflict and many actively resisted Confederate authority, with most just wanting to survive rather than split off. This number significantly increased towards the end of the war, as the Confederacy lost their ground. However, the war did gain significant support early on from a large number of the population, including wealthy slave owners and planters. These wealthy slave owners and planters felt the war was extremely necessary and a good thing, as they wanted legal protections for the institution of slavery, not a potential loss, as they saw President Abraham Lincoln a threat to the institution of slavery that they did not want, and a threat to their economic systems and already lifestyles that had been persisting since the foundation of the Union in 1776. This support also stemmed from overall loyalty to the South and their heritage, fear of the North influencing them significantly, and a belief in white supremacy and African American inferiority themselves. Even amongst those that weren't slave owners and just believed in a white superior society. While the South had a lot of backing to start the Civil War, The support eventually died out, and their collapse in 1865 was followed by a massive decline in support from the community.